Hi there, and welcome to Designing an Architecture. In this session, we're going to walk through an example of how we can design an architecture. So we'll start by reviewing the scenario that we're going to be looking at, and then we'll begin applying the architecture design process. And that includes the three steps which we've talked about in previous sessions, which are disclosing the business concepts that are important, organizing them on the four-layer canvas, and then assembling them into the final modules that we'll actually be needing. And at any point during this process, we may iterate between the steps, because if we learn new things and need to disclose things, we may go back to the beginning and start iterating through the process. Once we finish going through all of that, we'll talk about the benefits of this approach and how using the architecture design process and the four-layer canvas can benefit us in a number of different ways. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll start by looking at the scenario, which is a retail company which has a number of quality control processes. So Retail Inc., the company that we're looking at, sells thousands of products from hundreds of different suppliers at over 100 stores. The company has a number of different quality control processes, including how to do product recalls, and then how to audit suppliers to make sure that the quality of the products coming in is good, and how to actually audit the stores to make sure that they're handling the products well and that everything as far as processes and people are going well. So we're going to go ahead and look at how to design the architecture to create a solution that helps us manage the product suppliers and stores through all of these processes. So if we start with the product recall process, trying to get a simple description from the business or someone might give us something like this, which is they want to execute a supplier's plan to remove specific products and product families from the store's stock because something was either wrongly labeled, something's been contaminated, or is now deemed a hazard to the public health. And the suppliers for us are actually managed inside of an external ERP system. So this is sort of a high-level overview of what the process is. We can actually try to get more details by going through step by step what happens in the process and understanding who does what. So let's try to create a graphical representation of the process. Now we as a company may need a recall executive that's going to select the stores that need to participate in the recall. They'll notify the stores that they have been selected and will be part of the overall recall. The store manager will then report the stock of those products and product families, and once that is reported, the supplier will have to come back and suggest a plan for how to remove those particular products or product families. The recall executive will then review that plan and validate and decide what parts of the plan and how that plan should be implemented, and then it's the store manager's job to go ahead and execute that plan. So here we've seen another description of the process, but it's in a little different format, and it sort of brings up some other concepts that we may not have known about if we just saw the original textual description. So there are a number of different ways we can disclose or discover different things as far as business concepts that we wish to include as part of our architecture. So if we disclose these concepts, what would we get so far? Well, we know that there's a recall process, and the supplier is going to have to know which products and product families might be involved. The stores will have different stocks and amounts of those products, so we have to be able to track that information. And we can see the different suppliers and some of their information inside of our ERP system. So that's sort of something we could have got from the high level, but as we did the actual detailed process, we saw that there are different people involved. So the recall executive, the store manager, and the supplier are key roles that are involved with this. And there is a recall plan so that once we know all of these other concepts, we have to kind of combine them into a plan as to how things are going to happen. So if these are the overall concepts, then the next step would be to go ahead and place them on the four-layer canvas. So here you can see the four layers. We have layers that we've described in other sessions, like the library layer, the core business layer, the end user layer, and the orchestration layer. And we'll try to define the modules that will be the final architecture for each of these layers. But you do see a fifth layer here, and it's not necessarily a fifth layer. There are just 4 layers of the architecture, but there is a fifth area where we'll define user roles. So user roles and stories can be added so that it gives us a better feel for the overall sets of information that are inside the canvas. So it can be helpful to have that as well. So if we take all of the concepts that we were able to disclose from the recall process and we placed them here, maybe in gray, just to say, here are all the different things that may be on the canvas, where should we put each one of these now that we've discovered and disclosed them? So if we start organizing them, the first step in organizing the process might be easiest to start from the top and say, okay, there's a recall process. And that recall process had many different steps, and there were a lot of core business entities, core business modules that we may need. So we have the recall plan, the suppliers, the products, the stores, and the stock. And then as far as libraries go, libraries that will help us connect to external systems will have the ERP connector that will actually get us to the ERP system. Now, in looking at this overall process, we also saw that there were 3 different roles: the recall executive, the store manager, and the supplier. So now we've taken everything that we learned and disclosed, and we've now placed it in what's a good spot inside of the architecture for the moment. Now we may need to iterate on this as we learn more and maybe do other things to change the canvas, but this is a start, and it's part of the disclose and organize set of steps. So we could move on to the supplier audit process and see if we can discover more things and if those disclosures change anything that we've seen so far. So when we audit the suppliers, we're going to audit the suppliers to make sure that they are following and complying with all the standards that we care about, that they are looking out for hazards, that they have processes, critical control points in their processes that they're following well. And as part of that audit, we're going to sort of give them a score. If they get higher than a 90%, so they're following things really well, they don't have to be audited again until next year. If they do okay, but not above 90, but they are above 70, we'll audit them again in 6 months. And if they get less than 70, then they officially fail, and the supplier will be excluded from providing products to our stores in the future. So if we try to get to the details and do a visual representation of this as well, we're going to need an auditor to audit the supplier, and they'll actually go to the supplier site and do the audit. They'll create a report that gives us all the information about what they've found, and then they'll also begin planning for the next audit or writing the report that says they might need to be excluded. If the supplier is not excluded, or even if they are, the supplier will check the report and then begin trying to follow the recommendations so that they can improve on what they're doing and meet our standards. So this process would have a number of different new business concepts and a new role. So if we came into the 4-layer canvas and now disclosed things for the supplier audit process, we would see that there is an official audit with an audit report and a supplier audit plan. So we have some new core business modules that definitely apply. We add those to the canvas, and we also add the supplier auditor to the roles that are needed. So that takes care of the supplier audit, which leaves us with the store audit process. In the stores, we're going to audit our own stores every 6 months, check their storage conditions, make sure that the staff is following all of the processes and the policies that they need to follow, and that the materials are being handled in a good way. The auditors to do this work will be from the region that they work in, and they will report to the regional manager. So again, if we try to go step by step, there will be an auditor for the stores selected. They'll audit the store, they'll send a report on how the store did, and then they'll begin planning for the next audit. The store manager will check that report, and the store manager will begin following all the recommendations of the store audit. So again, if we come back to our 4-layer canvas, we would add store audit as a process, because that set of end user modules, all of these processes will need some sort of user interface to be able to interact with them. We would then add a store audit, a store report, and a store audit plan as core business concepts that are important. And we know we'll need a store auditor and a regional manager to select that auditor. So this gives us all of the different concepts that have been disclosed now for all three processes that we've looked at. But if we begin thinking about creating the user interfaces, we said that our quality control department would like to be able to see information. And the quality control department needs information about the recalls, the store audits, and the supplier audits. So it would make sense for our quality control business users to have a portal that could get them access to all of this as in one place, and then they didn't have to access 3 different applications and constantly bounce in between them. The suppliers themselves will care about recalls and supplier audits, so they're our external partners, and they need access to 2 of the different processes that we're looking at. And we'll have internal business users. So they may want to be able to check the information about the stores, their locations, what products and what suppliers are there. So we need some sort of back office capability. So here what we're doing is we're really creating 3 different portals for a specific set of people that need to access this information. And this actually needs to be known and disclosed and added to the 4-layer canvas as well. Because now we're saying, although we have these apps and these processes that can take care of the details, we want people to be able to get to that information easily. So the quality control department will have the eQual portal, the suppliers will have their own portal, and then we'll have back office portal to go ahead and let people get that information. Now, one other thing that usually comes up when we add these access points is that we like to have a different look and feel. So if we went back, each one of those sites had a slightly different set of color schemes, and we wanted to make it specific to the people that were using it. So those themes and those look and feels sometimes are referred to as domain themes. We're going to have one for the internal stuff that is the quality control department. We'll have one for the supplier, and we'll have one for the back office team. So now we've actually found more things that belong on the canvas because we've added these access portals. Having disclosed and organized everything that we've seen, the last step would be to assemble. Now, when we look at the roles and the things in the orchestration and end users, there aren't really any similar things that we could go ahead and put together. But on the core business layer and sometimes in the library layer, we may find similar types of things that we could begin assembling and grouping together. So let's go ahead and think about that for a second. If we look at these core business modules, we can see that there are a number of base concepts like location, stock, stores. We also would look for unbreakable concepts. So product and product family are very closely related. You can't really describe the product family without knowing some of the products. So that's important. And then we actually find that the supplier audit and the store audit have a number of very process-specific types of concepts. So we could begin thinking about how to put these together and assembling them in some way that makes sense. So if we do that, we could actually say that yes, there will be product services and location services, stock services and store services, things about the recall, and then making sure that the suppliers and the stores also have information about the audits. So we've now reorganized the different base concepts into what we might consider the final modules, because these will group things together where they'll have similar life cycles and they have very similar sets of content. So this gets us to sort of the final architecture that we were looking for. So when you follow that whole process, there are a number of different benefits that we get out of that process. So first, the granularity of components in the lower layers of the canvas will be higher and makes them much better building blocks, and they can be more easily reused in other parts of the architecture. So the higher the reusability of the core business modules and the library layers, that will avoid duplication. So there'll be savings for making sure that the components that we put together are highly reusable. Another characteristic of this approach is abstraction. So as we abstract concepts, the abstraction is higher in the lower layers, and this will help us to go ahead and hide some of the information. So we only expose the reusable parts, and we expose them with simpler interfaces. So this actually makes us have some information hiding, and it makes everything easier to reuse. We also would have the concept of composition or mashing up different components. And the ability to do that will actually increase as we move higher in the layers. And that makes sense because we want to compose components as part of our processes and portals, and we would compose those things of these reusable pieces that we have created in the lower layers. So all of these benefits lead to more autonomy in general. So across all of the different layers, by following this approach, we get more control and overall autonomy for how we're doing things. So in this session, to review, we looked at the overview of the scenario, and then we began applying the architecture design process. We did a number of disclosures, we organized lots of things, and at the end we assembled things. So we iterated through all three different processes and came up with a final architecture. And then after that, we looked at the benefits, the overall benefits of this type of approach. So that's it for the example of designing an architecture. Thanks for listening.